Let's start by understanding what a lease in real estate really means. Essentially, it's a legally binding agreement between a landlord and a tenant. This agreement grants the tenant the right to use a property for a specific period of time. In return, the tenant agrees to pay rent to the landlord. This arrangement protects both parties. The tenant knows they can use the property without interruption, and the landlord is assured of receiving rent for that time. Real estate leases are foundational to property rentals, setting clear terms and expectations for everyone involved. A lease is essentially a legal contract between a landlord and a tenant. It grants the tenant the right to occupy a property for a specific period of time, usually in exchange for paying rent. But more than just allowing occupancy, the lease clearly outlines the rights and responsibilities of both the landlord and the tenant throughout the lease term. This structure ensures that both parties understand what is expected, helping to prevent disputes. When we talk about real estate leases, we're focusing on agreements related to properties, whether residential or commercial. Understanding this foundation is crucial before diving deeper into lease types and terms. Here we have the key players in real estate leases, the landlord and the tenant. The landlord is the person who owns the property and grants occupancy to someone else. On the other side, the tenant is the individual who pays rent in exchange for the right to live in or use that property. Understanding this relationship between landlord and tenant is fundamental when discussing real estate leases. Essentially, the landlord provides the space, and the tenant compensates the landlord for the use of it. These roles create the basis for most lease agreements. Let's go over the core terms that are essential in any real estate lease. First, the parties section clearly names the landlord and tenant involved in the lease agreement. This establishes who is legally bound by the contract. Next, the property term specifies the exact unit or space being rented, so there's no confusion about what is included. Then we have rent, which details how much the tenant owes, the due dates, and the method of payment. Finally, the term defines the lease duration, when it starts, when it ends, and any rules regarding renewal. Understanding these four key elements is crucial because they form the foundation of the lease and protect the interests of both parties. When we talk about lease duration and types, there are three common structures that determine how long the right to occupy a property lasts. First, the fixed-term lease. This usually lasts between 6 to 12 months. It runs for a set start and end date, with rent and terms typically staying the same throughout the lease period. It's a straightforward arrangement that provides stability for both the tenant and landlord. Next, there's the month-to-month lease, which renews automatically each month. This continues 1 month at a time until either the tenant or landlord decides to end it by giving proper notice. This type offers more flexibility, but less long-term security. Finally, we have the lease-to-own option, which generally spans 1 to 3 years. It's a rental agreement that includes an option to buy the property later, often under terms agreed on upfront. This can be a great path to ownership for tenants who want to test living in the property before fully committing. Understanding these structures helps clarify the commitments and options involved with leasing real estate. A lease becomes legally enforceable when it includes several essential elements. First is the offer, where clear rental terms are proposed. Next is acceptance, meaning both parties agree to those terms. Then comes consideration, which refers to the exchange of rent for possession of the property. Capacity is also important. The person signing the lease must have the legal ability to enter into a contract. Lastly, legality ensures that the purpose and terms of the lease comply with the law. When all these core elements are present, the lease is valid and can be enforced legally. Let's talk about rental payments and the security deposit, two key elements in any lease agreement. First, the rent. The lease clearly states the exact amount of rent owed, which is usually paid monthly on a fixed schedule. There's always a specific due date each cycle when the payment must be made. It's important to note that most leases include terms about what happens if you pay late, so it's good to be aware of those details to avoid any penalties. Now, the security deposit. This serves as protection for the landlord against potential damage to the property or unpaid rent. It stays on file for the entire duration of the lease. When the tenant moves out and all lease conditions are met, the deposit is returned. However, deductions may be made if there is damage beyond normal wear and tear. Understanding these two elements, the rent payment schedule and the purpose and handling of the security deposit, is crucial to a smooth leasing experience. Now, let's talk about property condition and maintenance obligations in a lease. It's crucial that the lease clearly defines who is responsible for what when it comes to repairs and upkeep, and also who ensures the property remains clean and safe. On the landlord's side, they typically need to keep major systems habitable and functioning properly. This includes handling structural issues, plumbing repairs, and anything related to safety. Meanwhile, tenants are expected to keep their unit clean, prevent damage, and report any problems as soon as they arise. They also need to follow any specific care rules outlined in the lease. Clarifying these responsibilities helps avoid confusion and ensures the property is well maintained throughout the lease term. When we talk about landlord responsibilities, there are several core duties that are essential to keeping the property lawful, safe, and livable for tenants. First and foremost, landlords must provide a safe and habitable home. This means the property needs to meet basic health and safety standards so tenants can live comfortably. Next, landlords are responsible for making necessary repairs promptly. If something breaks or poses a risk, it should be addressed without delay to prevent further issues or harm. Along those lines, maintaining essential services like heat, water, and electricity is crucial. Tenants rely on these services every day, and it's the landlord's job to ensure they're consistently available. Additionally, landlords must respect the tenant's right to quiet enjoyment, meaning tenants should be able to live peacefully without unnecessary disruptions. They also need to honor proper notice procedures if they need to enter the property or make changes. Finally, landlords must follow fair housing laws and all local landlord-tenant regulations. This protects tenants from discrimination and ensures that the landlord's actions are legal and fair. These responsibilities form the foundation of a positive and lawful rental relationship. Now, let's talk about tenant rights and protections, which are essential to ensure a fair and safe renting experience. First, habitability means your home must be safe and livable, with all essential repairs handled promptly. Privacy is another key right. You must receive notice before your landlord enters your home, except in emergency situations. Fair housing laws protect you from illegal discrimination based on things like race, gender, or family status. Anti-retaliation protections ensure that if you report a violation, your landlord cannot punish you for speaking up. When it comes to deposits, there are strict rules about limits, documentation, and how and when your deposit must be returned. All of these rights are fundamental when dealing with real estate leases, giving tenants a strong foundation of protections. Here we have some of the most common lease clauses that you'll typically encounter in rental agreements. These clauses are there to keep expectations clear and prevent misunderstandings down the line. First up, the pets policy. This clause spells out whether pets are allowed at all, which kinds are acceptable, and if there are any extra fees or deposits you'd need to pay. It helps avoid any surprises for pet owners or landlords. Next, smoking rules are usually detailed. They specify if smoking is prohibited indoors, on balconies, or anywhere on the property grounds. This is important both for health reasons and protecting the property. The guests and occupancy clause sets limits on how long guests can stay and who is officially allowed to live in the unit. This helps landlords manage occupancy and ensure the property isn't overcrowded. Maintenance responsibilities are also clarified here. This section explains who is responsible for repairs and routine upkeep and outlines how tenants should report any issues that come up. The early termination clause is crucial if you need to end your lease before the agreed time. It explains the notice requirements, potential penalties, or any exceptions that might apply. Finally, the default and violations clause lists what actions or behaviors count as breaches of the lease and what steps the landlord can take if the lease terms are broken. All these clauses work together to ensure everyone is on the same page, making the leasing process smoother for both tenants and landlords. When a lease is broken early, it can create liability for both the tenant and the landlord. If the tenant breaks the lease, they risk losing their security deposit. the landlord may keep some or all of this deposit to cover damages or unpaid rent. Additionally, the tenant can still be held responsible for ongoing obligations like unpaid rent, reletting costs, and any other damages resulting from the breach. This can also impact their credit, as collections or court actions related to the lease break can harm their credit score and make it harder to rent in the future. On the other hand, if the landlord breaks the lease, the tenant has several potential remedies. They might be able to terminate the lease, demand necessary repairs, or seek relief to find alternate housing. Courts can also award damages to cover costs such as moving expenses or rent differences if the landlord's actions were wrongful. Moreover, if the landlord engages in illegal conduct like wrongful lockouts or other lease violations, the tenant's claims become stronger and can lead to additional legal consequences for the landlord. Understanding these possibilities is key to navigating lease terminations responsibly. When it comes to lease renewal and modification, most renewals follow a pretty straightforward sequence before the next term begins. First, there's the notification period. Typically, this means either party needs to give notice anywhere from 30 to 90 days before the lease expires. This gives everyone enough time to prepare. Next is the renegotiation phase. This is where the rent, lease term, and any specific clauses can be discussed and adjusted to fit the new agreement. After both sides have agreed, the next step is to sign the new terms, making everything official. Once signed, the updated lease takes effect. However, if there isn't a fixed-term renewal agreed upon, the lease often switches to a month-to-month basis, giving more flexibility but less long-term certainty. This sequence is pretty standard across most real estate leases and helps keep the process organized and clear. When we talk about real estate leases, one of the most important things to understand is that jurisdiction truly matters. Lease rules are not universal. What's perfectly legal in one city or state might be completely restricted somewhere else. This means landlords and tenants alike need to be aware of local regulations to avoid any legal issues. First, let's consider security deposit limits. Many jurisdictions impose caps on how much a landlord can collect as a security deposit. Moreover, they often set strict timelines for when the deposit must be returned after a tenant moves out. This helps protect tenants from being unfairly charged or having their deposits held indefinitely. Next, notice periods can vary widely, whether it's for rent increases, a landlord entering the property, or the non-renewal or termination of a lease. Each area might have different rules about how much advance notice must be given. Knowing these requirements helps both parties plan accordingly and ensures compliance with the law. Finally, habitability standards are another critical area influenced by local law. What counts as adequate heating, plumbing, safety measures, or repair obligations depends on where you are. These standards are in place to ensure tenants live in safe and livable conditions. But the specifics can vary quite a bit from place to place. Understanding these state and local variations is crucial in navigating real estate leases effectively and legally. When comparing residential and commercial leases, there are several key differences to keep in mind. Residential leases are usually shorter, often lasting 6 to 12 months, and benefit from strong tenant protections under consumer-focused housing laws. These leases tend to be more standardized, with clear renewal terms that often allow for fixed options or month-to-month extensions. The rules primarily focus on occupant behavior and maintaining the living space. On the other hand, commercial leases generally involve longer commitments, sometimes spanning 3 to 10 years or more. They are more negotiable, with terms like extensions, rent increases, and exit rights being heavily discussed between landlord and tenant. Commercial leases offer fewer statutory protections, so negotiation plays a bigger role. Additionally, these leases have strict limitations on how the space can be used, including specific rules about operations and signage, reflecting the business-specific nature of the lease. Understanding these distinctions is crucial when deciding which type of lease fits your needs, as residential leases prioritize tenant protection and simplicity, whereas commercial leases require careful negotiation to address the unique demands of a business. When dealing with lease disputes, There are several steps we can take to resolve the issue effectively. First, informal negotiation is the best place to start. This means having direct communication with the other party and making sure to document every agreement you reach. If that doesn't work, mediation involves a neutral third party who helps both sides come to a voluntary solution. For smaller financial disputes, like unpaid rent or security deposits, small claims court is often the best option because it's designed for limited dollar issues. Finally, litigation is used for larger claims or more complex cases where the facts are contested and legal action is necessary. Each of these options has its place depending on the dispute's nature and severity. Eviction is a process that follows a formal legal sequence rather than an immediate lockout. First, the landlord issues a written notice to vacate, typically due to unpaid rent or a lease violation, giving the tenant time to either fix the problem or move out. If the tenant doesn't respond or the issue isn't resolved, the landlord proceeds by filing an eviction lawsuit with the local court. During the hearing, both the landlord and tenant have the opportunity to present their evidence, and the judge then decides whether the landlord has the right to regain possession of the property. Finally, if the landlord wins the case and the tenant still refuses to leave, law enforcement can step in to enforce the removal. This legal framework helps ensure fairness and due process in real estate leasing situations. Fair housing laws are designed to protect individuals from discrimination when renting or buying homes. Landlords are prohibited from discriminating against tenants or potential tenants based on certain protected characteristics. These include race, color, religion, sex, disability, familial status, and national origin. This means that everyone should have equal access to housing opportunities, regardless of these factors. Understanding these protections is essential for both landlords and tenants to ensure fair and legal housing practices. Today, technology plays a huge role in how leases are managed. Most leases now are handled digitally, making the entire process much more convenient. For example, e-signatures allow lease documents to be reviewed and signed securely without needing to meet in person. This saves time and simplifies the signing process. Additionally, rent portals have become standard. These platforms let tenants make payments, receive reminders, and access receipts all through web or mobile apps. This not only makes rent management smoother, but also more transparent for both landlords and tenants. Another key advantage of modern technology is faster communication. Maintenance requests and tenant notices can be sent and responded to quickly through digital channels, speeding up the overall leasing process. Overall, these modern tools make leasing quicker, easier to track, and far more efficient to manage. Technology has truly transformed how real estate leases operate today. Before signing any lease, it's crucial to be vigilant and look out for red flags or warning signs that could cause problems down the line. If any term feels hidden, rushed, or one-sided, it's important to pause and review it carefully. Some common red flags include missing required clauses or basic disclosures, which means the lease might not fully protect your rights. Watch out for unreasonable terms that heavily favor the landlord, as they can put you at a disadvantage. Also, be cautious if there's pressure to sign quickly without giving you enough time to review the document thoroughly. Illegal provisions that try to waive tenant protections are a serious concern, so make sure none of these appear in your lease. Vague maintenance language that leaves responsibilities unclear can lead to disputes later. Finally, be wary of blank spaces or handwritten changes that aren't clearly explained, as these might be used to modify terms unfairly after you've signed. Taking the time to carefully scrutinize your lease helps ensure that you understand your obligations and rights, and it protects you from unexpected issues during your tenancy. A lease signing process usually involves 6 straightforward steps that guide you from searching to officially signing the lease. First, you start with a property viewing. This is your chance to visit the unit, get a feel for the space, and ask any questions you might have. Next comes the application step, where you submit your personal details and rental history to the landlord or property manager. After that, the landlord conducts a credit check to verify your income and assess any potential risks. Once that's done, you move on to reviewing the lease. This is where you carefully read through the rent amount, lease term, any fees involved, and the rules you'll need to follow. Then there's a negotiation phase where you can clarify any concerns or request adjustments to the terms before finalizing everything. Finally, both parties sign the lease, and the agreement officially begins. These steps ensure a smooth and clear process, helping both renters and landlords feel confident moving forward. When we look at a typical lease agreement, it follows a clear and logical structure. Think of it like an outline that answers the essential questions. Who is involved? What is being rented? For how long? How much it costs? And what happens after that? Most leases cover 7 key sections before anyone signs on the dotted line. First, the parties involved are identified. This means naming the landlord and the tenant. Next, the property section specifies exactly what unit or space is being rented. Then we have the term, which clarifies the start and end dates of the lease. The rent section is crucial, as it details the amount due, when it's due, and any late fees that might apply. Following that, the deposit section explains the security deposit, including how it's handled and what deductions might be made. The rules section covers important details like how the property can be used, maintenance responsibilities, guest policies, pet rules, and any other restrictions. Finally, the signature section is where both parties give their consent, making the lease legally binding. Understanding these 7 sections will help you navigate any lease agreement more confidently. Now let's look at the key differences between subletting and assignment in real estate leases. With subletting, the original tenant rents the property to another occupant, but keeps the original lease in their name. This means they remain responsible to the landlord for the lease obligations, even though someone else is living there. On the other hand, with assignment, the tenant transfers the lease entirely to a new tenant. This new tenant assumes all rights and obligations under the lease, and the original tenant is no longer liable. The key difference is that subletting keeps the original tenant responsible, whereas assignment fully transfers the lease to another party. Understanding this distinction is crucial when dealing with lease agreements. As you approach the end of your lease, there are some important steps to keep in mind to ensure a smooth move-out process. First, make sure to leave the unit clean by removing all your belongings, trash, and any visible damage. This helps avoid any unnecessary deductions from your deposit. Next, be sure to return all keys, access devices, including fobs, remotes, and parking passes. This is crucial for security and finalizing the lease. It's also very important to document the condition of the property thoroughly. Taking photos and conducting a walkthrough can really help confirm your move-out status and provide evidence in case of any disputes. Finally, expect an inspection from the landlord, who will check the cleanliness and wear of the unit and decide if any deductions from your deposit are necessary. A clear and documented inspection process is the best way to minimize disagreements and ensure a smooth transition. When a lease ends, the security deposit should be returned promptly, or deductions can only be made for reasons that the law specifically allows. These allowable deductions typically include unpaid rent, damage that goes beyond normal wear and tear, and sometimes cleaning fees or unpaid utilities. Regarding the return timeline, most states have laws requiring landlords to return the deposit within a certain number of days after the lease ends, often accompanied by an itemized statement detailing any deductions. It's important to remember that these rules can vary quite a bit depending on the state, or even the city, including differences in deadlines, what deductions are permitted, and penalties for not complying. Understanding these details can help both tenants and landlords navigate the lease end process more smoothly. To sum up, a lease functions best when everyone involved clearly understands the expectations, obligations, and legal terms. Remember, a lease is a binding contract that lays out the terms for using a property in exchange for rent. Both landlords and tenants have specific rights and responsibilities they must uphold throughout the lease period. It's important to note that laws can vary significantly depending on the location. So state and local regulations might affect what a lease requires. When disputes arise, there are remedies available, ranging from notice requirements and mediation to court actions or even eviction procedures. Finally, clear and thorough documentation is essential. Having everything in writing helps prevent misunderstandings and protects both parties involved. These key points are what make leases effective and fair for everyone.